James Richard Harris. James Richard Harris, 54, was a resident of Walker County, Georgia. He left his home to go to work at Miller Industries on December 22, 1994. But James never arrived at his job. He was killed in a robbery that happened shortly after he left his home. When a witness noticed James resting beside his pickup at the end of his driveway, they phoned the police to his house. James was known to follow a regimen and always have a lot of cash about him. The cash was all stolen, as the cops observed. Break-ins seemed to be the motivation. It was also evident that James resisted this assailant. A composite sketch of a potential suspect was observed by a witness at the crime scene in 1994, but the police were unable to identify any leads or suspects. That was prior to 2009. They were tipped off by Crime Stoppers. The specifics of the tip are unknown, but it directed authorities to Robert A. Morey. He also fit the suspect's description. Even after conducting numerous interviews and receiving thousands of tips, the police were unable to produce any hard proof that Robert killed James. Then, in 2020, a sample of Robert's DNA was obtained, and it turned out to match the DNA discovered in 1994 at a murder scene. The 50-year-old Robert Murray was taken into custody in September 2020. According to the authorities, the crime's motive is still a mystery. They continue to urge anyone with knowledge to come forward and provide further information about the incident. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. James Summers. In 2004, James Summers, then 47, and his girlfriend Alice Wise, also 47, resided in Jefferson County, Missouri. On April 27th, just after 8 p.m., the police were called to their residence. Officers discovered James's body leaning against an independent garage. Both his face and back had been shot. The pistol was a .22 caliber handgun, around 20 feet away from him. Alice, his girlfriend, owned it. The investigators chose to interview her. She claimed that she heard gunfire outside while taking a shower at home. Around the time of the incident, neighbors reported to have been outside, and nobody remembered seeing any strange faces in the neighborhood. It was also discovered during a reenactment of the shooting that gunfire could not be heard from the shower. Alice also told contradictory tales. She said she had to use the loo when the investigators asked if they could check the rope she was wearing for gunshot residue. She said that she had not shot a handgun in 20 years when they told her no earlier that day. For years after James was killed, she also informed her relative, adding that she had always wondered if shooting someone was as enjoyable as having sex. She said that she would ban it on her father's recent death if she was ever arrested. There isn't much of a distinction between love and hate, Alice said in response to the cousin's question about why she shot James. Even with all of this proof, some people thought that more was still needed. Everything changed in 2021 when the Jefferson County Police Department revealed Alice Wise, 65, had been taken into custody at a press conference. She continues to insist on her innocence. Please let me know if you believe she is guilty or not in the comments area. In addition to emphasizing how critical it is to address the present violent crime crisis, Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt told us that we must not ignore or abandon the victims of violent crimes who are frequently left out of the spotlight and whose cases have either gone unsolved or are no longer active. Jane Doe. Even though Christmas is a time of happiness and tranquility, it can also be a very tiring time for people who are going through a period of loss. As a result of people who are already suffering from despair being driven over the line by the surrounding jollity, there is a widespread belief that the number of suicide surges around the time of Christmas. At approximately the time of Christmas in the year 1996, the body of a woman was discovered at the Pleasant Valley Memorial Park Cemetery in Annandale, Virginia, lying on top of a sheet of plastic. The story of this woman is one of the most unsettling tales of the unknown dead, the author writes. The narrative unfolds in this manner. After entering a tiny cemetery in Annandale, A woman with auburn hair who was maybe in her late 50s or early 60s just entered. After locating a location that was adequate, she proceeded to lay a sheet of transparent plastic on the ground. She positioned a Christmas tree that was 8 inches tall and decorated with decorations next to her. She was carrying a green rucksack, wearing bifocals with translucent frames, a blue all-weather Eddie Bauer hooded jacket over a blue sweater, and blue pants. Additionally, she wore a blue sweater overall. By the time she completed a flask of brandy on a chilly morning in December, she was also taking Valium. This occurred in the darkness of the night. She was listening to a recording of comedians Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner performing their 2,000-year-old man routine while wearing headphones. She carried a portable tape player with her throughout the day. After that, she grabbed for the knapsack and pulled out a plastic bag and a roll of tape. She then positioned the bag over her head and secured it with the tape. Only a few minutes later, she passed out from suffocation. The body was discovered by a groundskeeper at the Pleasant Valley Memorial Park Cemetery, the groundskeeper said. Additionally, he discovered a message that read, "Deceased by own hand. No autopsy is preferred. My name is Jane Doe, and I signed the note." Additionally, the woman placed a request to be cremated and left bills for $2.50 to cover the cost of the cremation. At a later time, it was found out that Jane Doe was laying in the portion of the cemetery that was designated for the burial of infants who had passed away. Possibly, this was related to a scar of 8 inches on her stomach, which may have been caused by a cesarean section. In spite of the fact that the circumstances surrounding this case were thoroughly documented by the authorities, including a comprehensive collection of photographs, X-rays, fingerprints, palm prints, and a DNA sample, this mystery has not yet been resolved. The fact that this woman was able to maintain her anonymity for such a lengthy period of time is undoubtedly odd. For all intents and purposes, it appears like she did not leave behind any children, friends, or even neighbors who would be curious about her whereabouts. If nothing else, there ought to have been a house that was completely unoccupied. It appears that this Jane Doe has made a concerted effort to ensure that no traces of her disappearance are left behind. Moving on to the next case. Joni Harper. 39-year-old Joni Harper was a resident of Bakersfield, California. In addition to officiating Division I basketball, she was employed by the Bakersfield School District. A woman named Kelsey Spann begins to worry on July 8, 2003, when her friend Joni fails to return her calls for the previous 3 days. Kelsey chooses to see how Joni and her 3 kids are doing. It is her biggest nightmare as she walks inside Joni's bedroom. Joni, her mother Ernestine, and her 3 children are all inside. They were all slain. Her 2 kids were Marshall, 6 weeks old, and Marquez, 4 years old. Her daughter Lindsay was 2 years old. Ernestine, a 70-year-old civil rights campaigner, was a mother of 5 children. The police discovered no evidence of forced entry and no valuables had been taken, and none of the neighbors had reported hearing anything. All the police could go on was this. A member of the family was absent. Vincent, Joni Harper's estranged husband, was not in sight. At Bakersfield, California's John C. Freeman Elementary School, Vincent served as vice principal. In 2000, he wed Joni, but their marriage was dissolved in 2001 due to Vincent's adultery. Then, when Joni became pregnant with their 3rd child in January 2003, they got married again. The house was vacant when Vincent left in April 2003. Vincent was located by police quite shortly. When the police told him what had occurred to his family, he appeared to be inconsolable. Vincent explains to investigator Jeff Watts that he was in Ohio visiting family. His story was supported by activity on his credit card on the day of the murders in Ohio. Vincent had proof that he was in Ohio at the time of the murders, even though he was 22,100 miles away. The case was abandoned because they had run out of leads. When they finally returned to Vincent, They were shocked to see that he had stopped grieving and had even stopped ignoring the cops. He didn't appear to care if the individual who killed his wife and kids was apprehended by the authorities. Detective Jeff Watts was prompted by this to investigate Vincent's alibi further. Records indicated that on July 2nd, Vincent took a plane from Bakersfield to Columbus, Ohio. Upon arriving, he hired a Dodge Neon. Vincent disclosed to investigator Watts that he confined his car's usage to the Columbus region. Upon reviewing the documents, the investigator discovered that Vincent had driven 5,424 miles on the car. Vincent offered no answer at all for this when pressed. Detective Watts had to provide evidence, but he was quite certain that Vincent was the driver of the vehicle from Columbus to Bakersfield and back. To examine the Dodge Neon, Detective Watts took a plane to Ohio. He didn't find any proof inside the automobile because the rental company had cleaned it. At first glance, what he discovered was little, yet it would completely unravel this case. After noticing numerous bugs in the car's radiator, Detective Watts had an epiphany. Surely the insects could tell us where this car had been, he thought to himself. Detective Watts went to Dr. Lynn Kimsey, an entomologist who specialized in insects. First, Dr. Kimsey cleans off every bug fragment she finds on the radiator. A vivid red grasshopper, native to Texas and Oklahoma, was found by her. This demonstrated that Vincent had driven outside of Ohio, but not quite to Bakersfield, California. Next, she discovered a paper wasp. The papery substance that the paper wasp makes when constructing a nest is whence it acquired its name. There are just paper wasps in California. The evidence the cops required was this. But how Vincent managed to drive to Bakersfield and make purchases remained a mystery. What they observed Vincent's brother signing documents and making purchases. Vincent was taken into custody by the police in April 2004 and accused of 5 murders. Moving on to the next case. Kamaya Mobley. On July 10, 1998, Kamaya Mobley was born in a Jacksonville, Florida, hospital. Shannara Mobley and Greg Aiken are her parents. In addition to being incarcerated at the time for narcotics possession and distribution, Greg was also there because Shannara was just 15 years old when Kamaya was conceived, and he was 19. Kamaya was seized 8 hours after his birth by ladies posing as the nurse. The nurse-dressed woman helped and conversed with Shannara Mobley before leaving the room carrying Kamaya. The kidnapper was thought to be in his or her 20s and may have had a wig and spectacles. Over 2,000 leads, some from as far away as Nova Scotia, were pursued by investigators from a Jacksonville sheriff's office. However, none of them led to infant Kamaya. Investigators and Kamaya's family were unaware that Gloria Williams was the woman who kidnapped her. It is thought that she miscarried a child a week prior to the kidnapping because she was in an abusive relationship. Gloria gave Kamaya a new identity. She grew up in Waterboro, South Carolina, under the name Alexis Munico. She obtained her high school diploma from Culleton County. The Kamaya Mobley case was reopened by investigators in 2017. Then, a computer-generated composite was made to depict Kamaya Mobley at 18 years old. The media was then given access to this picture. A few leads provided to the authorities helped them locate Alexis Munico, an 18-year-old. When her DNA was extracted, it matched that of Kamaya Mobley, who had also had her DNA extracted after birth. Gloria Williams, 51, was subsequently taken into custody in South Carolina and sent to Florida by extradition. She faced accusations of abduction and tampering with the legal system. Gloria entered a guilty plea to abduction in 2018. She acknowledged participating in a 1998 kidnapping by herself. Gloria was given an 18-year prison sentence on June 8, 2018, for her role in Kamaya Mobley's kidnapping. She is currently incarcerated at a correctional facility in Hernando, serving her sentence. Kamaya still talks to Gloria and gives her mother a call. She added that Gloria provided for her entire upbringing. At first, Kamaya used FaceTime to communicate with her biological family. Then, in an effort to be nearer to her family, Kamaya relocated to Jacksonville, Florida in December 2019. The Kamaya Mobley story, Stolen by My Mother, was produced into a movie in January 2020. Unexpectedly, Kamaya revealed that she had known her true name and that she had been kidnapped since she was 16. Gloria disclosed all the details to her as Kamaya was unable to obtain a social security number. The two of them concealed the information for 2 years until detectives discovered it. Shannara was granted a $1,200,000 compensation after she sued the hospital for negligence. Ever since it was revealed that Alexis is truly Kamaya, not everything has gone according to plan. For example, she still goes by Alexis, and she and Shannara don't get along since Kamaya still calls Gloria a lot. It seems that there is, after all, a happy conclusion to this narrative. Craig and Shannara's photo was posted by Kamaya, who captioned it, "Parents." Moving on to the next case. Kimberly and Morrow. On May 11, 1986, Kimberly and Morrow called off her junior prom at her high school following a fight with her boyfriend. Instead, she went out with a female friend, and they met 2 male acquaintances who were 25 years old. At 11 at night, Kimberly dropped by her sister's house and promised to be back in an hour. Afterwards, she was observed accompanying one of the males into a late model, white Pontiac Trans Am. When she left her house, she didn't bring any personal items with her, including her purse and makeup. They allegedly attended a drinking party for teenagers. Later on, Kimberly's companion, Brian Inman, claimed to have dropped her off at around 3:45 a.m. the next day. He informed the authorities that Kimberly wanted to be allowed out of the car on Jewel Street, which is half a mile from her house, since she was still unhappy about the altercation with her boyfriend. Allegedly, she stated that she desired alone and to walk the final distance to her home. She vanished from sight forever. Despite suspicions of foul play, no one was prosecuted for her disappearance. For years, this cold case remained unopened. However, in August 2015, police, seemingly armed with fresh information, searched some of Inman's property. Nothing was found despite the use of cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar in the hunt. In September 2015, a YouTube channel named 00B4A56 emerged in light of the latest developments in the case. There were a total of 12 videos uploaded there. Some of the videos appear to be authentic 1986 VHS recordings detailing preparation for a crime on May 10, 1986. Other videos had unpleasant stuff and a few tiny coded signals, most of which were ASCII. When interpreted, the statement in the YouTube channels about section reads, "Trying my hardest to cover up my tracks and revealing things to clear my conscience." Codes from one of the videos said, essentially, "Think it's safe to come out now. Had to move. I have to use my videos more wisely. They'll track me down." The description of another film said, "I've had her since May 10, 1986. Nobody knows for sure if this was all a prank, or if Kimberly's disappearance had anything to do with the mysterious uploader because the channel has vanished and the recordings have been taken down." Moving on to the next case. Luis Victor Mendoza. In Buckeye, Arizona, a man's body was discovered on August 15, 2010. The remains were found close to Miller Road in a canal. It didn't take long to identify him as Luis Victor Mendoza, for shots had been fired at him. Numerous witnesses were questioned by investigators, and they even managed to identify one possible culprit. Then, however, lead directly up. An inquiry produced no results. The investigation was then revived by the Buckeye Police Department's Major Crimes Unit in July 2020. With the crucial witnesses they had identified, they carried out in-depth follow-up interviews. Antonio Padilla, a resident of Phoenix, was recognized by every witness as the person who killed Louise. Earlier in 2020, Antonio was freed from prison in Arizona. He was sentenced for both gang participation and a weapons infraction. Antonio was found by Phoenix police close to 19th Avenue and Bell Road in the early hours of July 22, 2020. They detained him while conducting a traffic check. He was carrying a weapon when he was apprehended. "This is exactly the kind of outcome I expected when forming this team," stated Larry Hall, the chief of police in Akai. "I am confident that in the near future, more unresolved cold cases will be resolved." It is still unknown why Antonio killed Luis Victor Mendoza. Moving on to the next case. Marcel Chandler, 24 years old in 1999. Marcel Chandler made his home in Mobile, Alabama. He worked as a waiter at the Applebee's restaurant on Airport Boulevard. When Marcel worked as a restaurant staff, he had a reputation for going above and above to say hello. At the time, he was majoring in computer information systems at a nearby trade school. He has a 4-year-old son as well. Marcel's body was discovered inside his wrecked car in the 4000 block of Crest Haven Road late on December 13, 1999. His vehicle had collided with a house's garden. Despite the fact that Marcel's body had gunshot wounds, the police thought he had been in an automobile accident. His death from gunshot wounds, not from the car crash he was in, was determined by the autopsy. Police named Jermel Thomas, a 42-year-old resident of Mobile, as a suspect in the investigation on June 12, 2020. Thomas has a lengthy discography that starts in 1997. Regretfully, the source that directed investigators to Jermel Thomas remains a mystery. He is presently being held on a $250,000 bond at a Mobile Metro jail. In relation to the cold case, a 40-year-old man named Damon Wright was also taken into custody on June 23. Moreover, nothing is known about the lead that brought investigators to Damon. Moving on to the next case. Mary Lindgren. Mary Lindgren, 67, resided in a Covina, California, assisted living community. Mary's body was discovered in her bedroom at the Covina Villa Retirement Community on January 19, 1996. Before her life was taken, she had been battered and assaulted. Investigators spoke with residents, staff members, and anybody else with ties to the facility. Still, they were unable to identify a suspect. After processing the DNA from the site and entering it into federal and state criminal justice databases, they were unable to locate a match. The case was abandoned. That was prior to 2019. At that point, investigators made the decision to re-examine the case. The State Department of Justice received the DNA samples they had. Then, they learned that a match had been identified in July 2020. They determined David Adolph Bernal, a 46-year-old inhabitant of Almonte, using the results. August 2020 saw the arrest of this man. A $2 million bail was imposed for him. Mary's family expressed relief upon his eventual capture and gave the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department credit for following through on the investigation. The fact that the individual who killed her has been located and taken into custody is greatly appreciated. The violent crime haunts us for almost 25 years. Knowing that justice will finally be done for her brings us relief. It remained unclear if Mary knew David or whether the attack was unintentional. Moving on to the next case. Michelle Bright. Michelle Bright was a 17-year-old girl from Galgong, a tiny Australian town in the state of New South Wales, in 1999. Lorraine, her mother, said she was flawless from the moment of her birth. She was a tomboy who liked animals and other people and was very beautiful. Her dream was to work as a veterinary nurse. Michelle went to her friend Lauren's 15th birthday celebration on February 26, 1999. She was dropped off at a business hotel a few blocks from a friend's house after the party. She was last observed at around 12:45 a.m. in front of the motel. I was unable to locate any information on why she was dropped off here rather than at her residence. Michelle's mother, Lorraine, became concerned when she didn't come home the following day. In search of her, Lorraine and her family frantically drove around in the rain. The police were called after they were unable to locate Michelle. A police officer discovered over-the-counter drugs in Michelle's room and declared her to be a runaway with a tendency of using amphetamines. I insisted again and over that her medication did not belong to her and that she was not a fugitive. I knew she would never have left me since we were so close. They refused to listen at all. Then, 2 days after Michelle vanished, the authorities were forced to pay attention. Less than a mile from Michelle's residence, on Barney Reef Road, her body was discovered that afternoon in a long grass close to the railroad tracks. She was being beaten and strangled, so it was evident. The family and the police came up with the theory that she must have been offered a ride by someone before deciding to end her life. Despite questioning numerous people, the authorities were able to obtain no relevant information. A $1,000 reward was offered in 2000 for any information that resulted in Michelle's arrest, but regrettably, nobody came forward. The family and the police then made a public plea in 2020 for anyone with information to come forward. They increased the prize to $1 million as well. Someone with important information stepped forward almost immediately. Afterwards, on August 12th, Craig Henry Rumsby, 53, was taken into custody. What the informant specifically said police was not made public, but it was the reason Greg was taken into custody in relation to Michelle's case. Still, there are a number of things we are aware of. Greg and Michelle shared a street at the time of the crime. He had known the family for a long time as well. He shared this about Michelle on Facebook. In addition, Craig was charged with assault in connection with an incident that happened on January 1, 1998, involving a Galgong woman who was 18 years old. According to the case's detective, we were able to obtain evidence as a result of the recent couple of days, and we will allege in court strongly implicates this person in what happened to Michelle. Michelle's mother was taken aback by the news. We mourn her so dearly and have to endure the most excruciating pain every day of our lives. Her convictions continue to exhort others to come forward with whatever information they may have. A tiny bit of knowledge could be helpful. Pamela Rose Aldridge McColl. The birthplace of Pamela Rose Aldridge McColl is Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Her mother characterized her as ephemeral and free-spirited. Pamela knew exactly what she was doing when she hitched rides while residing in Virginia. The Spring Hill Police Department was called to a report of a body on Saturn Parkway at the Port Royal Road off-ramp on March 10, 1991, just after 12 p.m. The feminine white owner of the body. The woman had obvious bruises to her face and neck, as well as torn clothes and knickers. Her fingerprints were used to identify her as Pamela Rose Aldridge McColl, 53. Pamela had, it was determined, been strangled. Sadly, it was also found that at the time of her death, she was 24 weeks pregnant. The fetus did not make it. Pamela was traveling with a truck driver, according to some witnesses who came forward and told the police. All the authorities had to rely on were the witness testimony and the DNA evidence taken from the crime scene. The case was abandoned because it was insufficient. The investigation was revived by the Spring Hill Police Department in April 2019. The case's investigators sent the evidence they gathered in 1991 to a crime lab so that DNA could be examined. They were able to generate a complete DNA profile thanks to the study, and they now knew the man they were seeking for is a white man. After that, the profile was added to the Cody's database. The DNA matched the DNA found at 2 other Wyoming cases that remained unsolved in 1992. Now that the police knew, the person who killed Pamela and her unborn child also killed at least 2 other victims. All they had to do was identify that man. The search for the man then required collaboration between numerous state and federal entities. The FBI, U.S. Secret Service, Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigations, and Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations were among those with this authority. In the end, their inquiry led to the identification of Clark Barry Baldwin, 59, as a suspect in both the 2 Wyoming incidents and Pamela's case. Baldwin lived in Waterloo, Iowa, and was a former truck driver. He was arrested by the police in May 2020, and after all these years, he will now fulfill his sentence for his crimes. Moving on to the next case. Paranormal Anna. Unusual Anna, also known as Alana G., was well known for her videos including real-life incidents, eerie tales, paranormal activity, and other disturbing subjects. Her most well-known work was a video series called True Scary Stories, which explored the unanswered questions behind Elisa Lam's and Kendrick Johnson's deaths. Her channel boasted over 50,000 subscribers, making her a somewhat well-known YouTuber. Her channel vanished into thin air on September 3, 2015, and other horror-themed and other genre channels debated why she had deleted her account along with all of her other social media accounts. Inspection revealed that she had made 4 odd tweets a few days prior to her disappearance from the website, all of which described a terrifying stalking event. I must, regrettably, alter the way I manage my social media. Facebook is no longer used. It's almost surprising that it took me this long to get a violent death threat for the first time. How could somebody be so stupid as to post that? My uncle happens to be a police officer. The other 2 practice criminal law. Her last tweet was, "Violently threatening my online will always turn up badly for you." Still, internet regulations are evolving. These days, you can't just threaten someone with severe harm and get away with it. Prior to typing, consider. Her accounts on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram were removed shortly after these tweets were published. The most common explanation is that she was stalked and abducted, although that theory has a flaw in that no news of her kidnapping has been found. Others theorize that she canceled her account because she was sick of YouTube. Nobody now knows her whereabouts or the reason behind her account deletion. Moving on to the next case. Phyllis Harrison. In 1998, Phyllis Harrison, then 71 years old, resided in Adelaide, Australia. In the community, she was well known. Phyllis belonged to both the Bowling Club and the Elizabeth Grove Uniting Church. When Phyllis was last seen, it was at 7:30 p.m. on March 2, 1998, while out for a walk with her dog. Her body was found in the kitchen when her daughter and grandson arrived at her Elizabeth South house the following morning. She had suffered many stab wounds. Even though the residence was broken into, it is still unclear what was taken. Nearby, the police promptly discovered a knife. It fit the description of the knife that was used in the assault. There were no indications of forced entrance, indicating that she had allowed the assassin to enter. The culprit and possible motivation were unknown to the police. The police kept the knife in case developments in DNA testing made it useful in the future. Ultimately, a 45-year-old man was taken into custody and charged in June 2020 about the 22-year-old unsolved case. Assistant Commissioner Peter Harvey of the South Australian Police stated that forensic specialists and serious crime investigators collaborated to make the arrest. In addition, he claimed that legal limitations kept him from disclosing the man's identity. The dude just lived in Northfield and is 45 years old. That's all we know. Peter Harvey was evasive when asked what exactly brought the authorities to this 45-year-old man. He did acknowledge, however, that DNA was involved in his statement and expressed gratitude to the forensic specialists. Maybe they were able to get fingerprints from the discovered knife, and this year adjusted it for demand. However, that is all conjecture. The children of Phyllis are relieved that it won't occur once more. Moving on to the next case. Raymond Carl Nelson. September 1st, 1911, was Raymond Carl Nelson's birthday. In 1941, he earned his diploma from Logan High School. He tied the knot with Helen Louise Smith on November 19, 1919. The pair made their home in Logan, Utah. Roberta and Claudia were the couple's 2 children. The last time Raymond was seen was on December 3, 1940. He went to his parents' place with his laundry. His sister remembers that he was crying when he was there. A truck driver came forward 9 days after Raymond was last seen, claiming to have given him a lift to Omaha. According to him, Raymond informed him that he had to go to the Omaha airport the following morning in order to begin work. Raymond was nowhere to be located in Omaha when the police sought for him. That made them think he was the one who committed the foul act. After he was last seen, his social security number was never utilized. In addition, the FBI searched for him and labeled him as a draft evader, saying, "I've always preferred to think that he didn't disappear on purpose, as something terrible might have happened to him." Roberta Nelson, who was only 4 months old when her father vanished, let her head first. "He was a good man who would never have left us on purpose, so his mother, my grandmother, always told me, until the day she passed away, that she was certain something horrible had to happen to him. My mother used to assure me that there were no marital issues." Jennifer Hoffman is the name of the kid Roberta eventually gave birth to. Jennifer decided to look for her grandfather on her own and started her own investigation. It was revealed to her that Raymond was very interested in model airplanes. He was also skilled in building them. In downtown Omaha, his planes were on show in a Brandeis window. A large department store in the neighborhood, Brandeis was well known for its window decorations. Jennifer chose to continue visiting model airplane websites. She felt that Raymond would have followed his interest if he had been living. She thought the Australian man she saw on one of the websites looked like Raymond. Monty Tyrell was his moniker. Sadly, at one point in her investigation, she was unable to determine whether Monty was, in fact, her missing grandfather. However, Jennifer got a call from a man named Mark Nelson in May 2020. During the quarantine, he had some spare time on his hands and decided to research his ancestry. He discovered that Roy C. Nelson was his grandfather, but he was unable to locate any prior to 1940. Mark told Jennifer that he found his great-grandparents, Nels and Millie Nelson, through his grandfather's obituary. Mark discovered that Raymond, not Roy, is the son in question. He wasn't sure why he went by Roy, but he reasoned that perhaps his grandfather didn't like the name Raymond. Upon perusing the U.S. Census records, Mark discovered that, despite his grandfather's claims to be from Hebron, Minnesota, he actually resides in Iowa. Additionally, Mark Nelson learned that Roy and Raymond Nelson shared the same birthday. His discovery of draft cards from World War II was the final straw. The penmanship on Roy and Raymond's World War II draft cards was identical. Then he did further research on Raymond Nelson. He read in an article that Raymond Nelson's granddaughter Jennifer was searching for him and that he was missing. That's the reason he gave her a call. Subsequently, the two collaborated to verify that Roy Nelson and Raymond Nelson were the same individual. Raymond had 6 children, 24 grandchildren, and 21 great-grandchildren after he moved away from his family and adopted the name Roy. It's still unclear why he left his family behind. We also don't know specifics about the new life he built for himself. Given everything that is known, letting his family do his laundry right before he left them was really bad of him. Rhonda Michelle Blaylock. Rhonda Michelle Blaylock, at 14 years old, was a resident of Surry County, North Carolina. She went to high school at Atkins. While strolling home from school on August 26, 1980, Rhonda and a companion got into a blue pickup truck. She never returned home, but her friend did. Rhonda's parents reported her missing to the police over the phone. Rhonda's body was discovered in Pilot Mountain's densely forested area a few days later. She had suffered a stabbing and an attack. Since she was last seen driving a blue pickup truck and a friend provided a very accurate description of the suspect, investigators had a lot of leads to follow. In spite of everything, the case remained unsolved for a long time. To locate the criminal, a special task force was established in 2015. Investigators provided a man's description. He called himself Butch or Jimmy. He was in his early 20s or late teens. The man was driving a model blue Chevy pickup truck from the 1970s or 1980s. Investigators chose to send the suspect's DNA, discovered at the crime scene, to a private DNA company in 2019. They discovered a match. Finally, an arrest in relation to the case was made on August 2, 1919. Robert James Adkins of Fisher Valley in Dobson was taken into custody by the Surrey County Sheriff's Office. Robert, 64, entered a guilty plea on December 15, 2020, and was given a 21-year term for his offenses. Regretfully, Rhonda's parents passed away before the lawsuit could be resolved. Moving on to the next case. Stephen Tuamey. Stephen Tuamey was born and reared in Ontonagon, on Michigan's Upper Peninsula. He was just 25 years old when he went away. He had been a short-order cook in a Milwaukee restaurant, and he was well known as an artistic and friendly young man. A classmate named Priscilla Marley Chenoweth recalled, "I remember being in art class with him, and he made this beautiful lead stained glass lamp. It was just lovely. I recall that he was capable of almost any artistic endeavor." 9 years after killing Stephen Hicks, on November 20, 1987, Dahmer contacted Stephen Tuamey at a bar and persuaded him to accompany him to the Milwaukee Ambassador Hotel, where he had made a nighttime reservation. Dahmer was residing in West Allis with his grandmother at the time. Rather than killing him, Dahmer claims, his goal was to just drug him and lie next to him while he investigated his corpse. However, Tuamey was on the bed beneath Daimler when he woke up the next morning, his chest wounded and crushed. Besides, there was blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. Dahmer's fists and one forearm had significant bruises when he checked himself, realizing that he had killed Tuamey's by beating him as a result. Dahmer stated he didn't remember killing Tuamey's. Later on, he informed detectives he was in shock that it had really happened. Dahmer purchased a sizable suitcase and transported Tuamey's body to his grandmother's residence in order to dispose of it. After chopping off his victim's head, limbs, and legs from the torso and extracting the bones, he diced the flesh into little pieces a week later. Dahmer then placed the meat inside disposable garbage bags. He wrapped the bones in a sheet and then used a sledgehammer to break them into splinters. For Dahmer, the dismemberment took about 2 hours to complete. He threw away every last bit of Tuamey, save for his head, in the trash. Following Tuamey's passing, Daimler covered his head with a blanket for a period of 2 weeks. Afterwards, he tried to preserve the skull by immersing the head in a mixture of bleach and Soilax, an industrial detergent with an alkali base. Dahmer stimulated his masturbation with the skull. Eventually, the bleaching process made the skull too fragile, so Dahmer ground it up and discarded it. Dahmer was not formally charged with Tuamey's murder because there was insufficient proof, but the serial killer acknowledged killing Tuamey. When Tuamey's family reported him missing 3 months after he disappeared, his father Walter claims Milwaukee police said they were unable to assist as there were no signs of foul play. Moving on to the next case. The Lawson family. The sounds of gunfire could be heard throughout the countryside close to Germantown in North Carolina on Christmas Day 1929. Charlie Lawson was responsible for the deaths of his wife and 6 of his children, and he took his own life a few hours later. Nobody knows why he performed these heinous atrocities, and this is the case to this day. It had been 18 years since Charlie Lawson had tied the knot with Fanny Manring, and during that time, the couple had a total of 8 children, 4 sons and 4 daughters. In 1920, their 3rd child, William, passed away, but on the morning of this horrible Christmas massacre, the other 7 children were still alive. Before the tragedy occurred, the family had been working as sharecroppers for a while before they were finally able to save up enough money to purchase their own farm. Charlie Lawson accompanied his wife and his 7 children into town during the days leading up to Christmas 1929 in order to get new clothing and to have a family portrait shot. This portrait would turn out to be the final photograph of them that was taken while they were still alive. In light of the fact that new clothes and portraits were considered to be rare luxuries for families belonging to the working class during that time period, this is now considered to be evidence of Charlie Lawson's premeditation. On Christmas afternoon, the heinous murder started when Lawson's daughters, Carrie and Mabel, who were 12 and 7 years old at the time, were leaving to go see their aunt and uncle. Charlie made the decision to conceal himself close to the barn, and when they got close enough, he ended up shooting both of them with a shotgun. Because he wanted to be sure that they were dead, he bludgeoned their bodies. Next, he made his way back to the house, where he proceeded to shoot his wife as she was in the porch. Marie, who was 17 years old at the time, screamed as soon as the gun was discharged, while James and Raymond, who were both little boys, were attempting to find a place to hide. Marie was shot by Lawson, who then went on to locate and shoot the two boys. The final act of violence that he committed was the bludgeoning to death of Mary Lou, who was only 4 months old at the time. Immediately following the massacre, Lawson fled into the surrounding woods and, it is believed, shot himself some hours later. His eldest son, Arthur, who was 16 years old at the time, was the only person to survive the atrocities. He had sent him out on an errand just before committing the crimes. The members of the family were discovered with their arms crossed and pebbles placed under their heads when they were discovered dead. In spite of the fact that this investigation is still shrouded in a great deal of mystery, a fresh hypothesis regarding the motivation behind Lawson's murdering spree emerged in the year 1990. Charlie Lawson was suspected of having an incestuous relationship with his oldest daughter, Marie, who may have been pregnant with his kid, according to close relatives and acquaintances of the family. Marie was also suspected of being pregnant with Charlie's child. In the present day, the 8 Lawsons who passed away on that day are buried together beneath a single tombstone that contains the wistful inscription, "Not in the present, but in the years to come. The land that it is in will be superior." The significance of our tears will be explained to us, and at some point, we will comprehend these tears. This is the case of Tom and Shudd. An unnamed guy, who is now known as the Somerton Guy, was discovered dead on Somerton Beach in Australia in 1948. This case is known as the Tom and Shudd case, and it has not been solved even to this day. An unused train ticket, a bus ticket, a comb, gum, cigarettes, and a piece of paper with the phrase Tam and Shudd, which means finished in Persian, were the only items that the man took with him. He did not carry any identification. The piece of paper was able to be identified by the local librarians, who came to the conclusion that it had been torn from the last page of a book that was originally a collection of poems from the 12th century. This book was the primary focus of the police, and the hunt swiftly expanded to encompass the entire country. The fact that a man who wished to remain anonymous came forward and stated that he discovered a copy of the book in the back seat of his car about the same time that the body was discovered, however, led to the creation of more mystery. A number of lines of random capital letters were found scribbled on the final page of the book, and it is believed that these characters constitute a code. This was another discovery that was made. Despite the fact that the initial hypothesis was that Somerton man had been poisoned due to the fact that his spleen had swollen to 3 times its usual size and his liver had also been injured, this hypothesis is still simply a theory that has not been verified. Because there was no sign of poison found in the man's system, there was no further evidence to support the claim. Having said that, this leads to yet another hint. A woman who worked as the receptionist at a neighboring hotel where the body was discovered stated that a peculiar man was staying in the hotel at the time of Somerton man's death, carrying a black case with a long needle inside. The woman also stated that the man was carrying a long needle. Additionally, the code that was inscribed on the final page of the book has been deciphered despite extensive efforts. A number of individuals who were working on the investigation asserted that the code is an abbreviation for its time to South Australia, Mosley Street. There was also a phone number that was discovered in the book that belonged to a former Army nurse who resided on Mosley Street. This was an interesting discovery. After some time had passed, she asserted that she had possessed a copy of the book, but that she had actually handed it to a guy named Alfred Boxall, with whom she had served. Although this was never shown beyond a reasonable doubt, it was widely assumed that Boxall was employed by military intelligence, but the Somerton man was, in fact, a Soviet agent who had been poisoned by Vauxhall. In 2009, Professor Derek Abbott of the University of Adelaide made an effort to unravel this long-standing riddle that had been hidden away. Abbott was still able to examine photographs of the deceased individual, despite the fact that the original autopsy report had been misplaced. He made the discovery that the Somerton man has a peculiarly shaped ear in addition to hypodontia, which is a disease in which one or more teeth do not develop to their full potential. The probability of two people possessing both of these circumstances is greater than 1 in 10 million, 0.00000, which indicates that these features are quite uncommon indeed. She had a son who had the same peculiar traits as Somerton man, and the nurse who lived on Mosley Street had a son who shared same features. A living cousin of the nurse collaborated with Professor Abbott to submit a petition to the government of Australia, requesting that the body of Somerton man be exhumed and the DNA relationship be confirmed. However, the authorities have not yet confirmed their agreement. Wendy Allison. Together with her parents and elder sister Linda, Wendy Allison grew up in Los Angeles. Wendy loved to paint and play the piano. In 1968, on a Sunday afternoon, 22-year-old Wendy called her sister regarding an advertisement she had seen in the newspaper for a hairdryer that was being sold. Wendy was curious to know if her sister Linda would like to purchase one. Because Linda wanted to spend the day at home with her family, she told her sister no. Wendy then set out on her own. She purchased the hairdryer while driving her beloved green Thunderbird down Fairfax Avenue. The last time Wendy was seen, she was at the nearby gas station filling up her automobile. Later that day, her family started to worry when she did not return home. Her failure to check in was peculiar. When this family began their own search, her mother reported her missing to the police in the middle of the night. Her boyfriend and her brother-in-law, Gil Court, used a helicopter to search the neighborhood from above. Wendy's boyfriend discovered their vehicle parked on Fairfax Avenue, less than an hour after the search was launched. After discovering her car keys on the rear seat's floor, the two of them proceeded to unlock the trunk. It was Wendy's body inside. It was discovered by investigators that she had been beaten and strangled. Her damaged fingernails were visible as she struggled with her assailant. Since she still had her watch and all of her jewels, the detectives ruled out robbery as a possible explanation. In particular, 4 males who were close to Wendy, her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend, her brother-in-law, and a friend, were the focus of the investigation. They thought she was acquainted with the assailant, someone who was aware of her solitary shopping. The boyfriend's rapid detection of her car caught the attention of the investigators, who likened it to discovering a needle in a haystack. More questions were raised when he failed a lie detector exam. The DNA sample that investigators took from Wendy's body belonged to an unidentified guy, but they were unable to identify it as being from any of the 4 males they were investigating. But in 1998, with somewhat more sophisticated DNA, none of the 4 guys remained suspects. Although the DNA was powerful enough to rule out suspects, it was insufficient to compare to collections in federal and state databases. Wendy's parents didn't mess with her room. Gil, her brother-in-law, steered clear of the Fairfax Avenue drive. Every few days, Lee, Wendy's father, would drop by the police station to inquire about any fresh leads. In an attempt to find anyone who may have seen Wendy that day, he even made a financial offer. The significant life events Wendy missed grieved the family. For her father, it appeared to be the most difficult. She was born the day he was, and every celebration felt empty without her. In 2016, Detectives believed that progress in DNA technology might enable them to solve the case at last. They were accurate. They found Edwin Dean Richardson as a result. Edwin's criminal history dates back to his early years. Burglaries were the beginning, and things became worse from there. He served 8 years in prison after being found guilty in 1960 of attempting robbery and kidnapping. It was in April 1968, 5 months before Wendy's death, that he was granted parole. He had died 4 years ago, so the investigators were unable to speak with him. Wendy's sister was relieved to hear that she could now finally relinquish her possessions. Yara Gambarazio. On May 21, 1997, Yara Gambarazio was born in Rimbart de Sapra, a tiny Italian village. Gymnastics was the center of Yara's entire existence. She adored competing in gymnastics contests, as did many of her pals. Yara went to the Brimbate de Sopra Sports Center, which is only 700 meters away, on November 26, 2010, around 5:15 p.m. She was only meant to be gone for about 30 to 60 minutes before returning home. That evening, at 11 minutes past 7, Yara receives a call from her mother, but it ends up in voicemail. Since it was unusual for Yara to ignore their calls and go later than she was supposed to, they phoned the police a few minutes later. The soldiers, known as the Carabinieri, and the police soon followed. Another 100 volunteers contributed to the Yara hunt. The police followed Yara's last known whereabouts. They discovered that Yara arrived at the sports complex and engaged in some exercise. She eventually left the sports complex about 6 o'clock. She texted a friend at 6:44 p.m. to make plans to meet the next Sunday. Around 5 kilometers from her home in the little village of McColl, Yara received signals on her cell phone around 6:49 p.m. A few weeks following her abduction, the authorities believed they had to identify the individual in question. Mohammed Fakari is a Moroccan immigrant whose phone was wiretapped. Mohammed uttered something like, "Pardon me, God. I didn't kill her." Mohammed was employed by McColl as a boulder. There found a blood-stained mattress in the rear of Mohammed's van. However, Mohammed's call was evidently mistranslated, and he was released even though it wasn't Yara's blood. 2011 saw a man flying his new remote-controlled aircraft in an overgrown field when he saw a heap of rags on the ground, exactly 3 months after Yara vanished. It wasn't long before he recognized the shoes and that he was staring at the severely decomposed remains of a small girl. The young girl's attire helped the cops identify her as Yara right away when they arrived. She sustained 2 facial wounds from a blunt object. Exposure-induced hypothermia was the cause of her death. She had been taking out a lot of grass in her palm for the past 2 hours. They discovered a small fragment of DNA that did not belong to Yara on her pants. The suspect is referred to as Unknown One. They could ascertain that the suspect had a 95% probability of having blue eyes based on the DNA. All the people who met Yara or may have known her were asked to provide DNA samples to the authorities. We discovered the individual with the missing Y chromosome in 2011. At the time of Yara's murder, the man with the Garanoni last name was in South America, and his DNA did not match exactly. Thus, they were certain that the man who was the suspect's family member had to be involved. They discovered that a town named Gorno was home to a large number of people with the last name Garanoni. In Gorno, they began examining the DNA of those who went by the last name Garanoni. They discovered Pierpaolo Garanoni, a man whose DNA matched that of Unknown One to 50%. This implied that one of his siblings had to be the culprit. Additionally, Pierpaolo's sibling did not match her sister. He only shared a 50% match with the DNA of Unknown One. Giuseppe, Pierpaolo's father, passed away in 1999, 12 years previously. It was quickly to be seen that in order for there to be another child that could precisely resemble the Unknown One, Giuseppe had to be unfaithful. To obtain a sample of Giuseppe's DNA, the police used a few of his personal items. Then they came upon a middle-aged woman who might be Esther's or Zuppy's mother. They discovered that Esther gave birth to a male, a female, and a third son. Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti, who resided in Mapello with his spouse and 3 kids, was the male twin. Massimo was caught by the police after they cleverly collected a sample of his DNA and compared it to the DNA of an unidentified person. Since the twins are both Giuseppes, Esther must have betrayed her husband. Remarkably, her third child was not her husband's either. Massimo was given a life sentence on July 1st, 2016. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.